Welcome back to JFK Values. I'm your host, James Felton Keith. This is another inclusionism podcast where we like to say individuals are at their best when they identify with a community, and communities are only at their best when they identify all of their individuals. In our quest to identify our neighbors both near and far, we'll spend this time exploring our values, especially the ones that prevent us from distributing value to those neighbors, both near and far. Thanks for joining us again. Let's get into it. Welcome back to JFK Values, everybody, where I feel like I shouldn't have to do this, but we are exploring our collective values to try and dissect and understand how we exclude people from realizing and capturing their own value. Peter Williamson is out today, so I'll be doing this alone and bringing in our special guest soon, attorney, educator, man of mystery, Reginald Greene. Let me bring him in now. I see him laughing. Reg, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I really love being a man of mystery.
I think you fit in that category. So for anyone watching or listening to this, I was in a room during my political days filled with intellectuals and I guess people who hover around them, talking about the economy and data and technology at this really nice loft in Manhattan. I think it was in Midtown, but I can't remember exactly where it was. And the only brown face sticking out of the crowd was Regis. And I was like, who is this man of mystery? Like, who is this other? And for anybody Black out there, for any Black men in particular, you know how it is. You know, when you're in the room, even if there are other of color faces, I'm not of color. I just picked one. Even though here in New York, I think people would throw a lot of colors on me. And I was like, look at this other brown dude over there. Like, I wonder what he's all about. And turned out he was a government operative. I'm kidding. But again, former assistant district attorney. I watched this man prosecute a hate crime case, which I thought was impossible to do. At least that's what Google will tell a lot of us. Former educator and principal and now mediator. Again, man of mystery. I don't know if anyone knows what all of those things are. So how do you identify?
Yeah, well,
professionally.
I'm a Southerner.
Southern, that part.
Born and raised in Paducah, Kentucky, but also I just like to solve problems, and I think you have to build relationships with people, meet them where they're at, and use your experience, which mine is multifaceted, as you laid out, being an educator, doing political science, being in a DA's office, now being a complex commercial mediator. Those are lots of different experiences to pull from, and it's very helpful when you're trying to meet people where they're at to solve problems. And that's basically how I identify. I'm a problem solver. I get to do it in a very cool way as a mediator. Yeah, because you're in a really nice building with very, very smart people who've already done most of the work, and we're just helping them get to the finish line.
Well, all right. Well, I want to get to some headlines, etc. But before we get to that, explain what did you call it? A corporate mediator?
Complex commercial.
Commercial.
So it's any commercial disputes. This could be entity merging with another entity, and the shareholders are upset. They feel like they didn't get their value, or they're claiming some kind of fraud, securities litigation. Sure. I mean, you omitted information would have benefited us when we were in the stock. We're suing you. This could be contractual between two large entities, delivering of goods. These aren't the right goods. Okay, give us a rebate. No, we're not going to. It could be a fire or a natural disaster, and the insurance company wants to say we're going to deny that part of the policy. Now they're fighting over that. So it's any commercial dispute. We do some discrimination, like employment discrimination here or there, but I think our bread and butter is mainly commercial complex.
So to be clear, when you say the smart people in the room, you're the lawyer in between two lawyers representing two other entities, maybe two institutions, maybe an individual in an institution.
Maybe a group of individuals, maybe a class action
but they're all Is it possible? Is it possible to have two classes? Two classes don't argue, right?
No. You'll have one class, and maybe you have a derivative suit. So you might have the class action by people who are harmed, and then you may have a shareholders claim where you're basically representing the shareholders. And plaintiff firms can do that. They can just say, we see a problem here. We're going to represent the shareholders.
Oh, right.
Right. And just do a derivative claim.
So you're usually with, again, but the two lawyers representing those two entities telling you we can't agree. Can you help us agree? Or do they ever, I guess agree to disagree is not a thing that you all get to do. You have to find a common ground.
I mean, they're often agreeing to disagree. That's why they're in litigation.
Yeah, but what they formally settle on is an agreement. It's not.
Yeah, they're both saying.
Formally, they disagree. But formally, they're like, we agree on X, Y, Z.
Yeah, a settlement is a settlement, right? You are eyes wide open. You are saying, yes, I'm signing the dotted line to end this dispute.
Right.
And they're sophisticated entities. I think we talked last week about what that means, just the distance between them and the product, how many people are in between the decision maker and the dispute. And so, again, these are large organizations with white shoe law firms or top 50 law firms with only the partners who are on the case. It's not junior associates in the room, but they're not talking. It's representing the entity and the general counsel for the institution being sued. There's usually a general counsel, and their insurance carrier has a counsel in the room.
So a lot of really nice suits in the room, like a lot of pinstripes, maybe, the lining is silk. It's maybe pink, maybe a light blue, something crazy,
I think there are a lot of fashionable people in the space.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's what you do. All right. To give folks, that just takes me right into what. So I'm, watching the news, across the week, I think one dispute that's going on right now between just in the Black Twitter world, and I'm saying Black Twitter has spilled over into every other group. It's basically stuff that Black people talk about that other people might not know that we talk about. And I think there are two factions in general disagreement right now about whether Snoop Dogg and Nelly should perform at the Trump inauguration or not. Any opinions about how everyone could better come together and agree about whether or not they should do what they're doing, or no? Any musings there? Anything at all?
I mean, Carrie Underwood, people were mad about her doing the God Bless America, and then other people are defending her.
Yeah,
I think I go back to what Malcolm X said in his interviews in the 50s.
Do you use that at work?
I mean, I'm not at work.
Okay, all right.
I'm just talking. I don't say anything of particular. I make jokes at work. I don't say anything particularly biased or political. But Malcolm X made the point in the 50s and in the early 60s that there's a penchant to want Black America to be represented by entertainers. And a willingness to listen to Sammy Davis Jr. He's like, why am I listening to Sammy Davis Jr.? He's an entertainer. I don't care what he says. Yeah. And the fact, and I think his line of going off, which he was great rhetorically, was, tell me what white community is listening to their white entertainers about what they're going to do with politics. That doesn't exist. It only exists in the context of the Black community. And so to see on my feed, Shade Room is wonderful. And I consume a lot of gossip through it.
Shout out to Shade Room, right? Wow.
So, whatever, right? Like I do engage in the culture, but at the same time, like, it's kind of crazy. Why are we talking about Snoop? I mean, we like, what is Snoop? Snoop has never put himself out there. He's not Nipsey Hussle, all right? He's not Nipsey. He's not LeBron James. He's not saying I'm an activist. He's like, I'm getting that money. And I think he's been very clear about that. And Nelly's very clear about that. These guys have $100 million plus. I think the deeper question is, why are so many people with so much money bending the knee for more money when they have so much more money than everybody else?
Yeah. In my brief life's experience, in being around really wealthy people is relative. I used to know a bunch of hedge fund guys that were like, if you have less than $10 million in the bank, it's no money. You need to, really buckle down. I was like, 10 million? Like that's a nice number. If someone had $10 million in the S&P 500 last year, they would have made $3.5 million for just leaving it there.
Yeah.
And because that's just how much it went up next year. It doesn't do that every year. But I think, value, at least tangible economic value, is a relative thing. Number one. Number two, because I think someone reported what Snoop and them were going to make, and it doesn't even seem like a lot of money to someone who has it. Not that we know their finances. I'll just say, personally, ethically, yeah, I wish they weren't doing it for who I am. But you're absolutely right. When I think about when Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style album came out, I was a kid, and I was lucky that my cousin was, a product that he lived with his in between his dad and his stepmom, and his mom and his stepdad, and they were always trying to like buy his favor. And so when we weren't allowed to get that album, because I think I was 10 when that album came out, or 12 or something like that, 92, 94. And anyway, my cousin's mom got it for him, and we listened to it in the basement, and it was like a bad thing. It was like we got to listen to porn. I mean, it basically was that album cover with the girl dog. We were like, our minds were being blown by the second with the stuff they were saying, all the curse words. And yeah, he was never really like a champion for rights of any sort, anyone's rights. I mean, pimping is essentially human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he was ever with the people, but he did represent a sentiment that I think predated us, whether we're talking about blaxploitation or all those movies. When I got to college, I watched like The Mac and all these movies with Richard Pryor in them, playing gangsters. And I was like, oh my God, this is what the 40 and 50-year-olds were just mimicking what the 60 and 70-year-olds were doing in the 70s and the 90s. I didn't know, you didn't know till 2000s until I was like, 18, 20 years old. But so you're right. Snoop, not the greatest guy. He hang out with Martha Stewart, but yeah, I think my knee jerk, per what Black Twitter is saying and Black Instagram and Black everything else. I'm on Fanbase, by the way. Now I downloaded all my TikTok stuff over there because Isaac Hayes' grandson started and again, I'm having a knee jerk reaction to this brother starting a platform. I'm like, fine, I'll do my stuff over there. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to post this podcast, etc. over there, see how it goes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wish Snoop wasn't doing it, but I mean, you make a good point. We can't trust these guys to be our leaders. I will say this though, and I'd love to get your take on it with regards to what Malcolm X said, because I remember that he also trashed like Lena, Sammy, so many other folks as non-leaders. But I think the difference between the mainstream or larger majority from a power standpoint community and minoritized communities is that the only people with access to capital, a lot of it, like Snoop's 100 million or whatever they have, Jay-Z's, 2-3 billion, are usually entertainers. They break out by catering to the lot of us. I even, this caters into, I've seen this in my regular work, starting a tech startup. I remember being told by venture capitalists early on that it'd be easier as a Black founder to get funded if my business model was B2C. For anyone not familiar, it's business to consumer, meaning I'm selling something directly to Reg, not Reg's corporation. But my business is B2B. I, like you, not exactly like you, I usually sit between two or more corporations kind of duking it out as they think about employee operations. Less legalese. But, I was flabbergasted by that when they said, I was like, I'm an old man. I've been in my industry for 20 years. I ran for office. I know a few people, and I do B2B work. I do stuff that people in suits do, which is basically like just drink light beers and eat salad for lunch all day. But I was shocked in doing that. And I think in the white community, the community that established our modern banking system, you have really influential people who are not famous, who have gobs of money, who can influence entertainers. We don't have that except for a few people. And crazy enough, most people don't even know who the top 2 richest Black men or Black people in the country are. So, I mean, I think that's a big difference. So it still matters to any minoritized community when the famous make a choice, even though you're right, they're not ethically equipped to make great choices. I mean, Malcolm X was not a rich man.
I'm making but I'm saying it's only our group that is defined by entertainers. I mean, that was kind of his argument. We're the only group that gets defined by them. Whereas,
I don't know, shout out to Bad Bunny. What do you think about the other in the Latino community? You don't see that?
I mean, he was talking in the 50s. So like there's a much more robust Latino community.
Yeah, they weren't here. Sure.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying today is different than what he was saying then. Today is more in line with what you're getting at, but still the definition of your community is for them too, is about your entertainers, not necessarily the people who are the thought leaders. And I think part of that is this stat that you had brought up to me before, that 400 rich white people have as much wealth as all 41 million Black Americans.
Yeah.
Right? 1,000 white people have as much as the Black and Latino populations combined.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot less wealth. And so from that standpoint, influence is higher. I still don't think we should listen to them. I think you should listen to people who know what they're talking about. You shouldn't just listen to people who have money and power. And I think that applies across racial lines. It's just particularly in our community, we are often defined by the people who have the most money. And in our community, as you just laid out, are going to be entertainers. For the most part, who turn those into robust, incredible businesses, media leaders who have turned it into incredible businesses, whether it's Oprah or Jay-Z, or prior to this, I mean, Diddy still got a lot of money.
He still got a lot of money.
But you know, these are the LeBron. LeBron's a billionaire. Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
So you know, it's not as much the brother that did the hedge fund, right? Robert Smith. Like I didn't even know who he was until he gave all the kids in Morehouse, you know, free rides. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So, I only knew him because I was in the tech space, but both of the other 2 billionaires are in tech. I always try to advise people, like, if you want to crush it, tech is your way out. Whatever it is you do, if you can make it technology infused, it's a good way out. But yeah, you didn't know Robert Smith till he did the Morehouse thing.
Not really. I had heard that there was this person, but I didn't know him by name. Like I didn't even. Yeah. I'd heard of his fund.
Yeah.
You know, but I hadn't connected it to that person, and I never had even looked up a picture and even knew what the guy looked like.
Another, yeah, you're right to call him a hedge fund guy. I mentioned the tech, but again, if anyone's not familiar, he primarily acquires tech companies. But you're right, he's a finance guy who came over there and saw the benefit in stacking these IT companies. So yeah, and now they have, you know, a bunch of assets under management. There some large mid-sized companies that we know, a whole cadre of them. But I mean, yeah, you're right. But that is what I think about. I think about the fact that 400 rich white people have more wealth than all 41 million Black people combined. And if you extrapolate that out to the top 1,000, it's really a little bit under that, rich white people in America. They have more wealth than about 80 plus million of us, because they have more wealth than all the Latino population, those that identify that way, and the Black population combined, which is insane. To your earlier comments, though, I really think it's difficult for people on the internet to differentiate subject matter experts who know what they're doing versus people who have a lot of influence. And when they say anything, you know, markets move. You know, people who spend 20 years toiling away at what they do, like you know, people might take Snoop's legal advice over yours. Like, well, what do Reg know? He don't got 100 mil like Snoop. And it's like, dude, but that's our reality. It's scary.
And values, right? What is undergirding our values right now? I'm not saying that capitalism isn't about individualism and making as much money as possible, nor am I saying I fundamentally disagree with it. I think it has brought about many of the advancements in human technology, life.
I mean, so too. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's true. And I don't know the other system. That's always the pushback. What's the other system? Look, I don't know the other system. Colonialism. I don't know any other system that makes this much money for this many people. Like I don't know any other system. but there has to be more moral capitalism.
I agree.
Because at some point, making another billion, it just can't be the outcome. You can't even spend $1 billion.
You can't spend one.
You can't spend it because everything you buy has value. So, you would never actually be able to go broke with $1 billion. You could never spend it. No, nor could your kids, your grandkids. Nobody could ever spend that amount of money. It's not possible. So value accrues and it continues and it compounds. So that's why I'm like, the morality that's lacking in our country, and that's not along party lines. I think there's morality is lacking in Democrats, Republicans. I think that's why you see so many people with no party affiliation. It all keeps coming back down to money.
Yeah,
how much money you have, and yet we're not seeing happiness increase with money. I think Scott Galloway made a point on Pivot about he's like, I can report that happiness doesn't increase after 20 million.
No, right.
It's 20 million, 25 million, 50 million, $1 billion. It's like your happiness doesn't really go any higher after that because there's not much you can't buy to create some form of happiness at 20 million.
Yeah.
You're just, to your point earlier, you're just trying to compete with these other people, or, I want the newest yacht, or I want a bigger jet.
Right.
I mean, geez, that's one hell of a way to live this very small piece of existence we all get.
You're right.
So, so morality is, I guess that's what I'm saying about the Snoop thing. His net worth is $160 million.
Okay. Are you I should have Googled it up. Yeah.
So like $160 million, like, why does he have to have, why he got to be on his knees for anything?
For anything ever, right? He don't have to do
$1 million. He could just not do anything for the rest of his life and it wouldn't matter,
Yeah, he could just invest. He could just, again,
he could just
conservatively buy the S&P. Right.
Yeah. He could. So what is it? It's a lack of morality. I think that's what people on Black Twitter are really responding to. They may not have the language for it. It's a sense that someone you thought was moral, whether you agree with what he said or thought was different, you knew that was Snoop. You knew Snoop was a pimp guy and all this other stuff. You knew that, but you thought that he was like a straight up guy. That when he said something like he did in 2017 about the inauguration and Coons and all this stuff he said,
right?
You would assume that gangster would continue with that. And it's like he did what Zuckerberg did. And I think it's really hard for people to accept
that he's a Zuckerberg.
Yeah, that it's just about money for him. It genuinely is just about money for him. That much that at $160 million net, you still at what is Zuckerberg? 105 billion?
Yeah.
Even at 105 billion, you still got to get on your knees. It's like, well, then what do you say to a person who's making $50,000? Jesus. Right. I mean, you have to be mind blown. Like, oh man, I got to get on my knees for the rest of my life. This brother making $100 on his knees. Right. And I think that's what's underneath all of it. The lack of morality is affecting people. They're just not saying it. And then these conversations on the internet and in politics is about, well, the economics didn't work for the working class. I'm like, it's deeper than that. People are definitely saying that there's no difference between the parties. That means it's deeper than economics. It's deeper than that.
Yeah, no, I think wow, you hit on so much right there. I had like 8 thoughts, and I don't know which one to pick out. But on your morality issue, again, it goes. I think that's the reason I agreed when Peter was like, we have to talk about this with everyone we know. I am happy to say next week, off subject but on subject, we are having on an activist who is doing something, and he was, again, noted, one of Time's most influential people, 2023, 2022, but does not have $100 million. But Chris Smalls is who we bringing on. He started the Amazon Labor Union. When I meet people who want to talk about labor and who want to talk about both economic value and just our moral values, I think he's one of those folks at the forefront. But a lot of people don't know, who the hell he is and what he does, or have gotten media pushed on him, which would say that organizing workers of any sort is a negative thing or a dangerous thing or, a not so desirable thing. But I think it goes back to people are constantly receiving media that very wealthy people are funding that suggests that we should lust after the access to power that they have, the material things that they have. Now, I'm not saying material things are a bad thing. They make our lives more comfortable. I think everyone would choose to, have a materially infused life to be able to survive and be around the people that they care about another year or 10 years or 50 years, which is about how much longer we live now than when capitalism was started. But you're right in that it lacks this moral rigor. I want to say one thing before we get into like the next series of cues that really touch on this same issue. But so for my subject matter expertise with my macroeconomist, labor economist hat on, I want to differentiate capitalism, the system, from how everyone normally compares it. It doesn't, like, a few people will hear this, no one will agree with what I'm saying. But again, they probably are not economists and do not study sort of the history of value distribution, because other spaces don't talk about it like that. But if you remember the standardized tests we took as kids, they do those analogies, and they have like the two colons in the middle of the words. I think, capitalism is, I think people usually compare it to a political system, but they shouldn't. I would say capitalism is to feudalism, something people may not be very familiar with, which was a system where property rights were distributed through nobility. And these are people who were anointed in a nobility, either through birthright or through monarchs that existed. And it was not just European monarchs, throughout the globe. This was a system that reigned supreme for thousands of years, from Egypt, if you call it Kemet, or Europe, China, all around the globe. We even saw
North
it here
America
in
as
North
well.
America. Yeah, we
They
saw
had it in South America as well. The Incas, the Mayans, they all had these
Right.
same feudal states.
Right. So capitalism became a way to better distribute property rights versus feudalism. And it kind of took over about 400 or so years ago, arguably a little bit more, maybe in the 15th, 16th century, because population was growing, because we had such material means at that point. We're really basically just shelter, transportation, and clothes, where people started to hook up more. And so population grew. You give me a shirt on my back, a roof over my head, maybe a boat, maybe a buggy to go on the back of my horse. I might have 3 kids instead of 1. They might survive. I might have 10. I might try to have 10, especially in the industry of that time was agribusiness. So I might have 10 to work my land, no matter where my land is, whether it's in Scotland or what is now known as Florida or anywhere else. So just to put that in perspective. But people usually compare it to democracy, it being capitalism, to democracy, communism, socialism, governmental systems. Those are separate systems, but they do play on each other. And I think, or I like to think, that they sort of act in a yin and yang type of way, influencing each other. There is real political power in how people feel and what people say, whether you're looking at what Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Barack Obama were able to do in courting in fanfare. And there's real economic power that we see in the tangible ability to distribute property, whether that property be capital or anything else that we own, that we see wielded by the billionaire class that exists. So they're constantly going back and forth, and people are always trying to debate like who has more power, right? Is it Donald Trump or Elon Musk? Who's running who? And I would say whoever can control the people with the guns is probably more powerful. I think there are plenty of reasonable arguments against that to say Elon might be more powerful than Donald Trump. But I don't know that he could incite a bunch of folks to storm the Capitol. So I would go raw power still with the preacher man, which is one thing that got me into politics about 10 years ago. I was an independent, and I thought everything is, it's not totally the same, but too close.
Mm-hmm.
Until I started dealing with politicians, and I realized you got to go out and rap to these people. And that was another thing Malcolm X used to always say. So, and as I live on Malcolm X Boulevard, I I listen to stuff he used to say a lot, probably too much. But so I would like to differentiate those and say, yes, we can add a moral layer to both the political and economic systems with which we found to be most useful in the modern day. And I think those two are democracy and capitalism combined. Ultimately, what they should be doing, but clearly they're failing to do right now, is subdue cronyism and subdue corruption. And they should be establishing more institutions so that people can put their trust in those institutions, and those institutions can regulate the quality of our access to power. That will be our political system, or democracy in our case, or our perceived case in America, because I think it's a debate whether we live in a democracy or not. And, you know, our economic system, or access to it. And so, yeah, I just want to differentiate those, because I think people throw around such crazy terms, like even the term fascism right now. It's a political system. So fascism is to democracy as capitalism is to feudalism. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what I will say is that all of the political systems that I mentioned, democracy, fascism, socialism, communism, if poorly engaged, can lead to a more feudal or capitalistic state. And what we don't want, or I don't think anyone should want, is for us to lead closer to a feudal state where you have a couple people and their kids making decisions about us.
Isn't that the reason why people are saying there's no difference between the parties is, at least in the American system, is because that is the case. Although the branding for the Democrats is terrible, they're getting branded as just elite, but they're not just elite, because
which is crazy.
Because, you know, in order for there to be as much money as there is in the Republican Party, there had to be a bunch of elite people. I mean, Trump's elite. I mean, there's a lot of elite people in the Republican Party. So, you know, it's
he's
just
aristocratic. Yeah,
they're politically, they're speaking in populist terms, which is a
people will call you and me. They would say that we're the elites. They'd be like, you lawyer boy.
Look, I think any people who are, well, I mean, we're living in Manhattan. We both have multiple advanced degrees. The industries that we're in are lucrative. We are both married to people who also are highly degreed and successful folks, putting ourselves in tax brackets that most people are not in.
I'm not rich, though. I'm not
agreed.
Rich.
Not rich, but definitely leagues beyond what people who are not elite. And I mean that in the terms of all the things I just said.
I gotta see at Trader Joe's, and look, I'm almost out of it. That's broke. I'm basically broke.
I mean, I'm just looking at your screen. I mean, of the two of us on the screen right here, I mean,
what?
You look elite, and I do not.
I just stressed it. Look, it's that's visually that's the queer part.
Visually, you do look elite. I mean, that is true.
This is a print. This was not that expensive. This is like This is Kadir Nelson from the New York.
Yeah, my back blurred out because I'm in a shoebox. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, I definitely think you're giving elite. But look, I accept that. I accept once you go to college and you're a professional, you are in some terms, at least in this America, elite.
Like I'm in my mid 40s too. I've been around I've been accumulating stuff. I wrote half of these. These aren't just other people's books. I got a couple of dumb ones that I don't like that I'm critiquing right now.
All academics are elite. So once you start writing books, you know, they don't put whole books in the syllabi anymore.
You know, I know. Won't nobody read mine. That's why I have to do this podcast, because I just talk about it instead. Here's a true story. So you write a book. I write an op-ed every month for Forbes, and it's just a different chapter of the book because no one will read the whole thing together. And then I go out and talk about it. You make the dough talking about the book, but ain't nobody reading the book.
I mean, I've read one of your books.
I know it was probably a bad book.
I've read one of your books.
Yeah.
I'm a supporter of Black businesses. Try to support it. but just to get to that, I love that you made the distinction between political scientist and me, which is a degree that I very, very rarely get to use.
Yeah.
I only got to use it when I was in policy work.
Break it down.
Sometimes I got to use it when I was out in the community doing building relationships. I found poli sci was helpful.
Yeah.
But yes, that is what a political scientist knows the difference between those two things. An economist knows the difference between those two things, but most of the population doesn't. And one of those examples that I give you that I think is relevant, particularly to your conversation next week with the brother that started the union. Like when I say I'm a libertarian politically, people are like, "Whoa, so you're a white supremacist?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not. I'm saying like literally like Stuart Mills. Like I'm talking about libertarian. It means there's an actual separation in the private and public sphere. You are not to be judged by what you do in your personal space. So this would mean, you deregulate social policies. You don't tell people that they can't do drugs in their own home. You don't infringe upon their happiness so long as it doesn't infringe upon others' happiness. So no, you can't beat people up because you like beating people up because you're hurting other people. So like there are all these rules that are based on you not impinging upon another person's social sphere. Yeah, that's what libertarian really is. That's why a libertarian would be against wars.
Yes, they usually are, but there's more. I mean,
but it's been co-opted.
You're picking the best pieces of libertarianism, and that's fine. That's fine. But yet, I think there are a lot of core tenets, right? It's very do unto others, leave me alone, let's not go to war, right? Those are good. The bad thing when we talk about, I think my main opposition to libertarianism, and I think we met in a relatively libertarian space around a bunch of like Andrew Yang folks. Some guy just tweeted at me, and yes, I did not delete my Twitter account for everyone because there are spicy parts of Twitter that I'm not ashamed to admit I still go and see. So I'm on Twitter. I'm watching. But anyway, some guy wrote that he can't believe that because people are getting so poor that a data dividend or a productivity dividend or basically a payout for the production of the economy. This is what somebody just wrote on Twitter literally this morning. He can't believe that it's not a part of every political platform because people are irate. And this goes to that tone deaf conversation about conservatives and moderates voted for Trump because of what's happened in the economy. And I think it's something different. I think it's specifically about sexism, racism, and classism. We can get to that in a second, but the guy tagged me and Andrew and somebody else that I'm not familiar with. But the point is, with libertarians, there's a second piece to their do unto others, hands off philosophy, which is generally good and aligned with, I think, most liberal policies, which is basically that there should be no support for others. So I think libertarians are the party of, or the philosophy of, equality. But like for instance, and the reason people always see those greater than and equal to signs everywhere is because I like to liken that sign to what is greater than equality. And I think it's a big conversation about equity. I think when you live in a system that was founded on unequal bars, it is difficult to suggest that everyone should get an equal shake in how they come into the normal economy or come into the normal political system, come into the normal power structure, because they are on an equal footing. It is like, I'm not going to use any of the normal corny equity analogies, but it is like two people of different heights trying to look over a fence that is already designed to be a certain height. And we need different support. I need a taller step stool if I'm a shorter guy. And I think libertarians often leave that out. And it's problematic. Like my co-founder at Inclusion Score, programmer, frat brother of mine, generally, I think a great guy. He's very libertarian, but he also has been a programmer his whole life and kind of lives in this I don't need any help, hands-off world. But he's also like 6'6", 250. And, it's like LeBron James probably thinks that the rest of us are feeble-bodied little, peons, and maybe we are compared to him, but I need a little support. And so as I tell my tall friends who 250, who seem to do well in any given scenario, different people need different support. So I like half of the libertarian ethos, but not the other half who says, hey, the rest of y'all fend for yourself. Because it's like, well, the conservatives will kill us if we fend for ourselves, because they don't think we need to be here at all.
Yeah, well, but again, that's modern day libertarianism. I'm just saying libertarianism was never a government structure. Libertarianism was a social political philosophy.
It's philosophy.
It's social. So it was, how do we interact with each other? How should we interact? It is not a government structure.
It's been scaled. And to be
clear, they talk about it now like it's a government approach. No, government is not.
There's a party. There's a part.
Yeah.
And this is something interesting that we get into with Chris next week, because he and some peers from different labor unions are starting the Labor Party. And we've seen other people make attempts to do, a party, etc. I am of the group that thinks that the two-party system has multiple sub-parties, and we argue internally until we come off. Like, I am on the extreme left. I think even further left than the libertarians. If anyone goes to inclusionism.org, they can see exactly what people like me think versus libertarians, progressives, and conservatives. And we are to the left. But what I would say is, to your point, is the libertarians have a party. They elect a candidate. And so that makes it structurally different. They're suggesting, and they're not there yet because they haven't captured the public's imagination, but they're suggesting there's a way to do the business of government like a libertarian.
Yeah, that's why I'm not a part of the Libertarian Party, right? Like I reject that concept, but that's what parties do. Parties define what we already have defined. They redefine it for their purposes, which is to have power, to get influence, and to be elected. So I'm not.
Is power immoral? Like, because I think that's what you got to do as a party, because you got to fight, as Lupe Fiasco always says, I fight evil. Like, if conservatism is staring you down and says, I don't think parts of you should even exist. Like, if you wear glasses and I think you're a cyborg because you're using technology, and I don't think it should exist. I think you should just accept the world the way God made you. But that's what they will say, because I think conservatism is always rooted in, they have that deity behind them. Can I
ask you a question?
Like them. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's your show, so
go. Yeah, go.
But in your view, what are American values when it comes to wealth, or how we value wealth, or whatever this generation or the generations alive right now? How are we valuing wealth in this country? What is it? What is the value of America?
I think so. Two things. When you say what are American values, I think that might be different than what James's values are. And then when you say what are we valuing right now, I think that's different than what I would suggest I value or think we should morally. I think America, so I'll try to answer, unless you want to refine the question. I'm just going to leave it. I won't leave it on the table. This is a good cocktail party question for sure. It's a good dinner table question where no one actually gets to eat dinner, but they just talk, which is the kind of dinners I like to go to, which is why I need to gain 10 pounds, because I'm not eating. I'm just talking lately. But I would say American values are, at this point, desperation capitalism. And I think we are being prodded and incentivized to buy in. And by desperation capitalism, I mean we are incentivized to lust after those who have, number one. And number two, we are given just enough to survive via our wages, number two. And number three, we are marketed that we can gain more if we would just work harder and bootstrap. And so even the way we talk about immigration, is specific to how much productivity we can predict from that immigration. I have friends here in the city right now. I was just in East Harlem with a bunch of Mexicans, and they were talking about deportation. And some of them are in immigration court. Some of them are married to Americans. Different things are going on different ways. And in order for them to just make it through the system of, and this ties into your question, so I'll wrap it up and make it as brief as I possibly can. They ask this couple in immigration court about, they won't even see them unless both parties are working. It reminds me of like when they let people out. It's like the grand recidivism project that we have in this country when people come out of jail and they're like, you got to get employed, this and that, which is very difficult to do. So shout out to anyone who comes out of prison and finds a job doing anything. But they want them to have a job. They want to know what everyone does. They want to know how they're productive economically in society. Now, the macroeconomist in me knows that anyone existing in this space and time will be inherently, they will incentivize production. Like the question, I think, before the American bureaucracy for people who can become American is how much more productive can you be? Not just is your existence productive, because we have to supply you clothes, shelter, food, you name it, which are cyclical goods that you require to exist, which is productivity. They want to know how productive. So I think we have put people on this rat race of desperation capitalism that tries to measure all of us by productivity. That's our current state. I don't think that it is morally sustainable. The problem with that is I don't know, and I think the work at least that I'm doing is trying to see if it is possible to incentivize people to reject the current state and argue and organize for something new. Now, it's very difficult because I think people become more depressed when they see, back to our earlier conversation, someone who they thought they trusted, like a Snoop Dogg, betray their gritty, desperate culture, which I think can be argued is the group that he comes from. They feel betrayed and they feel depressed. They feel like, well, if my guy ain't with me, who is? Where is my opportunity? How do I make it out? If I am that, as you say, that $50,000 person who got to get on your knees to the billionaire class just to comply, I think they provide some interesting incentives from a workplace culture standpoint, from a broader cultural standpoint. I think most people are terrified about how they will exist tomorrow, and not in the old, 600 years ago way where we're terrified if we even be alive or have something to eat tomorrow. They're terrified if they'll be able to live now with the dignity of the same food, clothes, and shelter and transportation, and you name it, that they know exist. They'll be terrified if they can actually have it. And last anecdote I'll add to that is I spent a lot of time in Southern Africa. I remember being at one of my boys' weddings, his first wedding. I went back to his second wedding. I normally tell people I will not come to your second wedding, but if you're getting married in Zambia, I'll come to every wedding because, it's in Zambia. So there's a rich family in Zambia, black family, not obviously, but they are. We're riding around these dirt roads and Range Rovers and Mercedes going out to where this wedding is. And the people just sit on the side of the road like it's nothing. And we riding around looking like aliens. Because these people are Western rich in a place that is still developing. And a couple months after that, my boy comes over and visits me in New York, in Detroit, and we go over to Michigan. And I had this little BMW Z4 with all these horses in it. It was a mean ass car back in the day. And we're riding around, and he is hanging out the side of the car. The roof is off the car. I got pictures of it on the internet. And he's hanging out the car, like pointing at the kids on the block, like, yo, what's up? And we ride through like my old neighborhood. And I'm like, bro, you can't. I grabbed his hand, pulled him back in the car. He's like, what are you doing? You can just grab a man's arm, like pull him back in the car, like, dude, chill. So he's a little pissed. I was like, bro, these kids over here, it's not like Zambia. They know what resources and wealth looks like. Not that I was riding around wealthy. I'm poor, again, per my statement earlier. But, you know, I'm a working poor. But I was like, these kids will kill you. They will blow your head off because they don't like that you have the thing that they can't get and you get around a lot easier than them. They on this block because there's no car to get in and ride somewhere else. And it made a little sense to him as he started to think about all the music that we both listen to. Like, they all listening to our hip hop over there in Zambia, in South Africa, in Namibia, in Botswana, you name it. And I was like, yeah, it's real over here, because those kids see how these billionaires and people in the class in between them move around. And I think that transparency is devastating to people. I think it's why hip hop, by and large, I mean, which is my favorite genre, is the one I grew up on and one I listen to every day, is a bit emo and depressed. And maybe I'm a bit emo and depressed as a result of it, which is why I do this work. I think it might be the only thing that gives me a little bit of hope. But yeah, that's where I think America is right now. I do think that's a little bit of hope in me that we can hack it. But I think it will take educated people like us who wouldn't have traditionally had access to the ivory towers of this system to design new hacks to expand the system and invite more people in, to make it inherently more inclusive. As the economics guy, I think that is specific to property rights, but we need a lot of lawyers that help us actually execute that, which is why I love talking to you about these topics in particular, because we can get nerdy about how and maybe actually stumble upon something. That's a big maybe, though. I don't know. Sometimes we're just talking.
Well, I mean, your guest next week, Chris Smalls, is he college educated?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. We just got his bio. I have to read his bio again.
So, like, you know, do they have to be educated? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think education comes from. I think the only thing I got from college, I guess, is not the same as being educated. I think everything that I learned in the field and work. I do think that I was fortunate to acquire some decent networks in college, but I can maybe only point to one or two classes that I got a lot out of that I remember well. Your stuff might be different because you know, I mean, even in the law practice, I feel like you use that stuff all the time, but I don't know, I could be wrong. I don't know how you feel about that, but I ain't learned nothing in school. I got it, you know, in the shop, in the doing, on the go. What do you think?
I mean, I learned how to learn. I mean, again, it wasn't about the what, and we talked about that last week with Peter. It's not about the what. We all are engaged by different things we want to know. I mean, sure. We're all that's why we have different majors. We pick different things to study. We have trade schools. The what is very personal, but the how, as an educator, it's actually quite universal. Human beings effectively learn the same way across the entire world. So it's not a mystery. We know what tactics work for how to teach people the most effective way. Your values as a country for wealth generation, which is what my question is. If your value is consumption and productivity, then does it really matter as much how you learn? No, it just matters what you produce. So if you came up with an idea which was exploitive, took a lot for a lot of people, but you ended up selling that to a large corporation, well, it didn't really matter how you learned in school. It really mattered how you learned how to make that money. And so what is it that you're learning how to do is becoming more what's important in this country than how to think. And the how to think is being informed by the culture. And how to think is make that money and do whatever you can to make as much money as possible with the lowest output. And the lowest output is a newer thing. You know, the baby boomers are generationally frustrated with Gen Z and even millennials who are like, well, I don't mind working hard. I just don't think I need to work dumb. Like I can work from my computer and get just as much done as going into the office, except for I'm losing an hour Whereas baby boomers like, it's not about that. It's about you showing up and showing
I hate
people
that.
and how you're supposed to be. And so culturally, there's just a really big difference in how they value productivity.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, we work hard. Anyway, keep going. Yeah.
People work hard and they do it in different ways. And generationally it's changing. So now the ethos is, how do I make as much money doing the least amount? Which isn't a bad idea. That's what undergirds the stock market. That's what compound interest. I make money while I'm sleeping. I mean, that's the whole concept. But it's usually been for the ruling and elite class. It is only in this newer generation where you have a TikToker or a YouTuber or people who are self-made saying, I'm going to spend this money I would have spent on college trying to figure out how to get as much money doing the least amount of physical work.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what people aspire to. And then when they're not able to do it, because, that works really hard. It's really, really hard to do. They're just working at the bodega, or they're working 3-4 jobs, trying to get to that point where they can work, make a lot more money with less physical output. People want that. And that's what remote work is. People want that in this newer generation. And there's a conflict between the generations on the value of it. And so,
their old model didn't work for us. But yeah,
it's different. I don't think education has the same cachet as it once did when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s. It doesn't, even though the economic outcomes are still the same. You are going to make more lifetime earnings if you have a college degree versus if you don't. But the cost benefit analysis of it is different than in 1989, where you weren't paying loans for the rest of your life to get that higher lifetime earnings. So, it's really for people now, it's what am I producing? And these college degrees are turning out, though they increase your lifetime earnings, they're kind of an albatross, because if you don't end up hitting the lottery of sorts, the education lottery, and you don't pick the right industry to go into, then you're actually making less than you would have made if you just settled down, got a job after high school, and just pumped it out. Your lifetime expectations, though, change in terms of living, because your conditions are different when you don't have healthcare. Your conditions are different when you don't have some of those safety nets. So I think people are feeling all of that. And I'd be really curious to hear from Chris Smalls, what is that like from his perspective, fighting a large institution and getting people? Is there a cultural aspect where people are with him on the idea of unionizing? They're with him on the concept of it. But when it comes time to really, really do the hard work of it, are some of the ways that we learn our values of wealth, the way we learn our values of productivity, impact the ability to keep everybody banded together to fight that fight. And I certainly know in my educational experience, that was the tough part. Everybody didn't agree on what productivity was. Everybody didn't agree on what our stand should be as teachers. And so we could never strike, because we could never get everybody to do it, because it was going to hurt the kids. And that was the reason why some people were doing it. So they weren't going to hurt the kids, right? So that you had those competing interests. Or
wait, was it going to hurt the kids? Were they sure that was just that was the rhetoric of that moment?
Certainly there's a rhetoric of old school teachers who are in the unions of every day those kids aren't in school, they're hurting.
Oh, right. If you all striked, right? School will stop, right?
And school isn't just about learning gains, even though that's what we always talk about. It's about socialization. It's about going to a place every day where you have a community, you have friends, you have relationships, and rely on those people to be there every day. That's what school really is. For most kids who are in it, for most young adults, that's what school is. It's a place that it's your place. It's your place in an adult world. That's your place.
I don't know if we have time to get into this. I mean, we can go over if you got a minute, but I'd love to hear your union experience. So you're referencing a time when you were running a school
before that, when I was a teacher.
When you were a teacher,
and
where
first, when I was in Miami-Dade, right? Like I was a teacher within the Miami-Dade County school system. You're automatically in the union. You have to pay dues.
Oh, really?
And, like you just automatically in. You have to go through a process to opt out of the union. And so I was in the union because it was basically mandatory. So, and I was just pissed. I was like, I'm paying all this. I know I'm not going to be, I don't think at the time I'm going to be a teacher for 20 years. So I really don't want to pay this money because I don't see this pension. It ain't going to happen because I'm not going to be here for 10 years. So, So why am I paying into this? I don't want to pay into this pension. So it was those issues that I first was teaching. But then I went to charter schools which for the most part are operating like, private institutions.
Sure.
So they didn't have a retirement plan, which hindsight's crazy. They should have had a retirement, should have had match. It was crazy. They didn't have any of those things. So it's certainly exploited as a young person, but I believed in it. And I liked the autonomy, and I liked that I got to negotiate my own contracts. And I made more than most teachers because I negotiated my contracts based on my student learning goals and what value I added to the school. So I could be like, I want a leadership stipend because I do this. You can't do that in the union structure. I can't go out here and get side hustles and say I'll handle summer school and I get this stipend and I'll do after school this and get this stipend. You don't get to do that, especially when you're a third-year teacher. But I was making money like I was a 10-year teacher because I was doing all that stuff.
So has the individualism killed the nucleus of the union? I mean, because that's what I'm hearing. Like or libertarianism, I would say, as a philosophy, as a leave me alone, let me just come here and do what I can, which is educate.
Well, yeah, when you're a young teacher, as I was, and very impressionable, and really thought this was the civil rights movement of our time. Like that's how I got involved in Teach for America. I thought, this is us getting on buses going to the South in the 50s. This is us going into the hood. We're going to give back to our community.
How old were you? This is right out of undergrad?
Yeah. I mean, I graduated when I was 19. So I was 19 when I was in Teach for America.
Oh, that's way younger than me. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I was younger than everybody.
You went to school at 16?
Yeah. I started at Simon's Rock and graduated from Chicago at 19.
Oh, nerd. Anyway, keep going. Yeah, right.
So, that was what I thought I was doing it for. So I was impressionable. So when the leaders of the charter networks were like, they're taking our autonomy away when they're adding this union, because the teachers started a union at my school.
Right.
And I was a dean at the time. And I was like, what are y'all doing? Like the UFT don't want, they just taking up these schools. They're not going to do nothing for you. And it's going to be a blood fight. And it's going to be terrible because this private board isn't going to want to be ruled by UFT or AFT, because then they have to actually negotiate in kind and have retirements and pensions. They did not try to do that. So it ruined the school. There were 2 years that school was just infighting, kids, parents. It was horrible. And it's from that place that I was like, we had to vote. We had to vote to recertify the union. Either you were on the union side or not. I was a person that was against it, much to the chagrin of my sister, who's an advocate for all organizations. Organizing entities. She's an incredible human being. But
I already love her. I don't know her, but
incredible human being out in San Diego. Give her a big shout out. She does. She's you can look her up. Kira Green. She's awesome. But she was very disappointed in me. Like, I can't believe you're going to vote to decertify the union. I mean, I said, well, I made more money when there was no union. I mean, I don't like working with. And this is a young person, right? This person in my early 20s.
Sure, yeah,
My first experience in education was like a teacher that couldn't read, was like the 4th grade teacher in the district school. And I'm like, this person should be here, but they here because they in the union. I had a guy in the rubber room who had been touching on some kids. The guy was in the rubber room. I'm like, so we paying this man's salary because he's in the union.
What's the rubber room? The rubber room.
It's where you send people when they're under investigation.
Oh.
And under union rules, certainly in Miami-Dade County, you had to pay them while the investigation is pending, because that's what collective bargaining does. It makes sure that the least of us
proven guilty, right? I get it. I get it. Morally, at least.
Yeah, I don't disagree with them morally, but the issue was, you know that person wasn't good, but they're in the union.
He was Diddy, right? Yeah.
So you gotta work together. I'm different now. As an older person, I totally get it. But as a young person, I was like, this is crazy. These people are incompetent.
So wait, was that a thing that they want you, or did you make it in a leadership role because they were like, he's a tool that we can use? Was that a thing?
I think, look, this was back in early 2000s in KIPP, which at that time was the biggest charter network. I mean, back then we were all just true believers. I think the same way that a public defender believes unabashedly that every single person should get their day in court. It doesn't matter if they're guilty. It doesn't matter if they touch kids. It doesn't matter if they don't care. They're going to do what they got to do for them.
Sure.
That was the mentality of anybody from those days who was in education in a charter school network like KIPP. You believe fully in the mission. So I was one of them, and that's who gets, went up through the ranks.
Yeah.
And I went up, I was very young. I was 23-year-old dean of students. I mean, I was very young.
So I think that's the interesting thing about institutions and institutional design in general. the person, some other person, right, who designs the institution is ultimately the one who will manipulate and, identify and anoint and scale other people, other assets through the ranks. I mean, I go through that right now with the standards writing institute that we have for corporate DEI internationally. We sort of hacked and overtook the old org that exists because we have more people. Those people who believed in sort of process over, the old model, the old way. I won't spend this time here getting into that, but what we saw, or what I always see, or what I knew, I guess my only skill set from organizing was understanding how the construction of an institution might fight against the ideas that I disagree with. And someone at KIPP or in charters or more broadly, nationally or internationally, sees a way to hack the old inefficient system if they believe it's old and inefficient instead of catering into it. So, I mean, that's interesting to me that, but we see that everywhere. The young blood, the young lives who agree philosophically are always the biggest and best and brightest tools of the institution, because old folk become a bit jaded, even if they old lawyers, right? Where you also were, who are like, well, innocent until proven guilty, but some of these people I've been around to see enough. The problem is, or the scary piece is always when and if they miss the mark on their experience, their intuition, and they throw some innocent person in prison, or in the education system when they neglect some kid who just needed a little nurture to be able to go on and do something, relatively extraordinary. But I think that's society, right? Like, we're all potential casualties of the rigor of society. So, I mean, back to your story though. So you're in there, you become dean at 23. I'm just putting all this stuff in perspective. You are 40 now.
Yeah, I'm 40 now.
Just turned 40, right? So that's a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. It was a different time, right?
It was
a different time. Like, even the cell phone game was just completely different.
Right? Oh, bro, right.
Like, beginning,
I had a Nokia.
It was a very different time. So I didn't, and I still don't care. I mean, I can hear people in my head going, "You shouldn't be talking about this on no podcast. What if you want to be in politics?" Well, I clearly don't.
I think this helps.
Politics. But I think you should be honest about whatever your views are. You should be honest about that. Do I think? Look, I would really love to talk to Chris, because I think it's incredible what he's done.
You got to come on then. You definitely.
But I have so many questions, because it was different when I was a true believer. My mission was to help every Black and brown kid living in poverty be able to go to college and do well. A union does not help you reach that outcome, at least from my young brain. But now I can look back and say, actually, what gets kids there is having teachers who are in a place for long enough to learn those things. Because, as a young teacher, you do mess up. I mean, I did mess up. I did not nurture a kid or yelled at a kid I shouldn't have yelled at. Of course, you do all that stuff. That's the learning pains of being a teacher. Yeah. But you have to become a master teacher. You have to keep doing it. And you have to stay in it, and
master anything.
Yeah. You have to stay in it. And in the world of charters, nobody was staying in it. Right? You burn out after 3 or 4 years because you're working these unsustainable hours. Without that net of like a pension or retirement, you weren't really keeping people in there that long. They would go as far as they could, and then they would move on. People got older and want to have kids. So then they're like, I can't work these hours. I got kids now. So then they wanted a more stable environment where school ends at 3 instead of school ending at 6, or where they don't have to do summer school. So those things, as you get older, you kind of aged out. Back then in the charter networks, you aged out, or you went up the ranks. So you had a more sustainable schedule. So you became a dean, or that's the only way you could really create balance. Right. And to that point, you are basically a tool of the institution, but part of being a tool is you had to believe in the institution.
Are you saying or suggesting that that model doesn't work? Is there anyway?
I think it always works for the institution. I think that's why you have young people in the institution.
Does it work for the young people? The charter model versus the regular public model? Because there's an argument right there, both public. Anyway, keep going.
I don't know what they're like now. I mean, I think they're much more stable now. I think most charters operate as if they have a union. They kind of operate with retirement and 401ks and all these things built in. I think they've become much more corporate. And so back then they were like
even
startups.
KIPP?
Yeah, KIPP, all the big ones.
I know KIPP. I know some
Success
kids at
Academy,
KIPP. I
the
know
Achievement First.
that woman. I can't remember her name right now. Yeah.
So all those groups have learned over those years, learned from what KIPP did when it grew really fast. Like there are just things you need to put in place to avoid turnover. Turnover is a bad measurement for charters, so they wanted to overcome that. Building relationship with Teach for America, where back in the day, you wasn't a Teach for America person. You couldn't just go straight into charter school. You had to be like a teacher for a while before you went to a charter school. Now they have feeders directly into charter schools, which means there's a district feel to charters now that wasn't the case in the early 2000s.
Was that technically the Teach for America model, to be a feeder to charters? Like that was the market they were satisfying? No,
Teach for America changed a lot over the last 30 years. I mean, it initially was an elitist institution where literally the criteria to be a Teach for America alum was you had to go to a top tier undergrad school, and you had to be a leader in the school. So you had to have been either head of a fraternity, president of an org. Like you had to be one of those things, and you had to go to a top 50 school.
Oh,
yeah,
that's crazy.
So when I went, the acceptance rate at Teach for America used to be like 8%.
Yeah,
you get 20,000 applications and accept 8% of the people. Yeah, it was crazy back then. But then they found like they weren't having any people of color. They were not going to HBCUs. They weren't. And the people they found over time who stayed in the institution were people who either wanted to be teachers, so they had teaching degree majors, and Black and brown folks who came from those communities and really wanted to give back. And so then they changed their model, I think about 15 years ago, to, hey, we're actually just teaching teachers. This isn't for elite people who have no intention of staying in education more than 2 years. Whereas they marketed to us in the early 2000s. It's on, if you don't have to be a teacher. This is just 2-year commitment.
Well, right. Those are the people I know. I know some people a little bit younger than you who went in as their second, like they started in the industry. Then they were like, I want to do something, more impactful. And so they went in to Teach for America. Again, they're a few years younger than you, and it even came in later because they like went to a 4-year school, then worked for 2-3 years, and were like, I'm gonna go be a teacher. And all of those guys I know, they're all young Black men, young to me. They all quit. And I mean, they quit fast. Like a kid teased one of them. I remember him telling me the story. He quit right then. I'm like, man, get in there. Like, let that little kid bully you, bro.
Teaching's hard.
Teaching's very hard. I was a bully as a kid. I'd be like, bring your parents in here. Bring your parents.
K through 12 is tough. I mean, it's
I'll be in there. I'm not a teacher. I did other stuff with my career. I don't plan on changing and going back. But I mean, I'm like, come on, man. You can get in there. My sister was a teacher. She fell in love with it. My parents were pushing her to be a doctor. She got a biology degree, came back home, was doing it part-time. Next thing you know, she was teaching for 10 years. And she still, with the Keith Institute, designs a lot of work intern programs for school districts around the country. So if people see kids getting real world experience in secondary school, not just in high school, like middle school, etc., across the country, that's a lot of us. Like we're deeply involved in that. But I remember being impressed and inspired when she was like, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't what my parents were pushing her to do, which was be a doctor because they wanted her to make, money.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that was the thing. But I didn't know that, because I know a lot of HBCU people who did Teach for America, but I didn't know that was sort of after your time. But it makes sense. Again, they're a bit younger than you. So
it was only Morehouse and Spelman. I mean, those are the only two.
Yeah, I know some Spelman girls. Yep.
Yeah, that was it. Those are the schools they went to. They went to Spelman.
I'm thinking some people way after 04. These are like some people around like 20 in the 2010s, because these kids wouldn't have graduated from college till like 08, 09.
They made those changes then. After they'd been around for 20, 25 years, they started.
I know some Hampton guys, I know some Tuskegee guys, but definitely
it became a feeder system. They realized that charter schools are turning into districts, no longer being startups. They were turning to actual districts. And so feed them Feed them like you feed your other kids.
Industrification. I mean, are they a potentially an opportunity to hack the current model? I mean, I know we're getting into a whole new topic right now, but I mean, so two things. Let me say two takeaways, or two assumptions based on what you said. But you, again, correct me if I'm off here. Unions create a better quality of life to sustain teaching as a career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And secondarily, charters seem to become a industry within themselves that at least has the potential to test ground other education models, or
that was the purpose of charters. That was the actual purpose of charters in the 80s and early 90s.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Concept, but they became businesses unto themselves because, well, I can tell you historically and politically, vouchers, right? The concept of vouchers and privatizing education was prompted up by one political party. I think Republicans traditionally were for privatization of schools.
Yeah.
A variety of reasons for that, but that's the party that pushed it. Charters, run by people who are, for the most part, pretty liberal, seized on that vacuum and said, wait, we're liberal, but there's this group that really wants it. And so they were able to give a lot of funding in the early 90s. You know,
funding meaning government funding.
Meaning
or
funding from people, the same large donors to the Republican Party around privatization became donors to the charter movement.
Here's my problem with privatization, again, as a left. I'm not even going to use political parties as an identity. So forget the Democrat thing, forget the Republican thing. My issue is over privatization and not using government when it needs to do like big infrastructural things like health and education. Again, the two industries or areas I would say I'm most ignorant about is conservatives. They have access to capital and guns and can protect themselves. So they don't mind things being private because they think they can protect it. In a world where we are trying to distribute rights to value of sorts, whether those values are trapped in capital or other types of resources, people do not have the ability to protect the value that they can identify tangibly. And so when we relate that to the institutions that we build, we cannot live in the world, not sustainably, not at this point, not at this iteration of humanity, where everything is privatized, especially not our, the two bottom rung proper uppers, for lack of better phrases, of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is education and healthcare. And when conservatives go down that road, and libertarians like the hands-off ilk, I'm going to oversimplify there, but feel free to keep me in line with that. When they follow them down that road, I think it's dangerous for a lot of us, especially those of us without guns and capital that can protect how we predict our life going tomorrow. I mean, it's ultimately what we're trying to do. I think as individuals, as terrified individuals, we're notoriously bad at being able to predict our survival tomorrow. So we band together, we create communities, we build institutions to see, can we almost guarantee that we'll be here for another week, right? And that's broad. I think that's, if I look at all the empirical evidence of how humans have lived, we've seen that scale over, let's say, 5,000 years. The past 500 have been extraordinary. The past 50, even more extraordinary. But there are certain people who y'all don't need nothing to live. And I don't think that everyone in those groups believes that, but the leaders, I think, are dangerous, and they want some of us to disappear. And I don't know whether it's from an innate fear anymore or whether it's just from a general greed and resentment for otherness, whatever the other looks like, people they don't like, people they're not attracted to, you name it. But regardless of why they do it, I know that they exist. So when I think about my deliberate efforts to include and provide equity or solve for belonging for people, I'm always thinking about those sociopaths, is what I'm going to call them, who don't want the rest of us to be able to predict that we will survive for the next week. I think those are the people that we're fighting. And, I think how we unionize, and I'm just using union broadly, about how we build community, it matters. And if we'll be able to survive tomorrow. And I think a lot of people feel depressed, like they're not sure if they'll be able to be here tomorrow. And just being here in general is not satisfactory. I mean, being here with a sense of dignity, with a sense of predictability about how well off they're going to be, how well they're going to be a week from now. I don't think a lot of people, I don't think they got a good feeling about it. I think that needs to be the political sentiment that folks tap in. And to your question earlier about Chris Smalls and those people who unionize with him, I think they're just genuinely angry at another class of people who they think are preventing them from being able to survive. I think that's why the president of the United Auto Workers says, "Eat the rich," and he gets really loud cheers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to hear it, because there are some places where I don't think unions are appropriate, and this is just my personal opinion. I don't think first responders should have that much power.
You're gonna go to, okay, fine, but they are. Yeah, I know. In New York, they are.
Most powerful lobby is definitely the benevolent police league. I mean,
there are a lot of police unions and first responders. AFSCME organizes some of them, the support staff in those places, especially in government. But again, in other states, we see other unions playing the SEIU, the UAW.
But the only thing is, with people who have guns, people who got guns and are allowed to kill me, I have a hard time with them being like, "We'll stop working if you don't pay us a certain amount." I mean, it's a tough thing to be lauded for your service to society, which is what that's all about.
Is it about service? I mean, I know that's the branding.
That's what branding. I think that's the third rail. That's what you can't criticize them, because they what are you going to do when your house is on fire? You're going to call the fire department, which I agree with. So I don't have a problem with fire. I don't have.
We do criticize them though all the time, and we do it via litigation.
True. I mean, litigation is how we handle it, but that's from people with money. That's elite.
If we tie litigation to activism, I think it'll matter. I don't think people know how many lawsuits.
But it doesn't matter when we pay it. No, I don't know.
When the people pay it?
The people pay it.
When the people pay it. No, I hear what you mean.
When you sue a first responding entity, you're suing the state. So
I think what we need is more activism there, though, suggesting or propping up or delivering more potential candidates for those roles. But we don't have that cycle.
It's really hard to hold people accountable when they're not spending their own money. And so again, a union allows for.
But that's why my solution, well, not to cut you off, but that's why my solution is more specific to property rights, because people don't feel like that money, like government money, is their money, but it is. And we pay more taxes than Warren Buffett and co. And so people should be prepared to say, this is my dough. Now, I know it's a lot to organize people. As someone who is actively out here doing it, people are like, bro, I can't afford to care Sunday. I'm exhausted. So but my argument against yours with regards to unions being able to exist everywhere is like, if there is a transaction of value and it hinges on worker input for one reason or another, I think that there must be some availability, at least, for individuals to organize their thoughts and institutionalize how they argue on their behalf. I think morally.
Again, I'm older. I'm not the same young person that was against all unions.
I'm not saying
I do have a hard time with people negotiating the terms by which they will be sued, negotiating the terms by which a settlement will be paid, and none of it's their money.
So maybe some of that's off the table. Maybe they're negotiating other things.
Yeah, but
I agree with that.
Negotiate salaries. I'm fine with that. You can negotiate operating budgets. Fine. But when you say you have one of your officers kill somebody, they're not liable, but we're going to pay their settlement. Mm-hmm. Like the taxpayers are going to pay their settlement.
Yeah.
The same way that it's wrong for like football teams to get tax dollars for their stadiums and not share the profits with the city. It's crazy. And that's effectively what happens with certain unionized first responder groups. And I'm specifically talking about the police. They just, it's just so powerful. And then when they mess up, there's no way to actually hold them accountable. Like the union itself is not held accountable for the failures of the folks the bad apples, let's say. Yeah. They're not held up. It's actually just sued the city. So then we have to pay it.
So
And they're in much more managerial positions too. Like a sergeant is in a union. A sergeant,
because there's a lot of them,
right? But as an
it's different
ADA,
than a manager at the finance office.
but an ADA can't be unionized. ADAs are not allowed to be in a union.
I hear you. I think that's interesting too.
Right.
And
So
I said by what I said earlier, like if there's value.
Your service is different. Like I'm serving people too. I'm
Sure.
not a first responder, but I'm there for them after they've been raped. I'm there for them after they've been shot. I'm helping to get them whole or get them connected to resources or helping them out. I mean, I'm basically a social worker on top of being a lawyer. When
everyone would argue that they are, everyone always makes that argument about being a social worker on top of their work. The police do it, the lawyers do it. And it's like, yeah, I've been an engineer at a manufacturing company before, and we went to China to make cars. And one of the engineers, like, I feel like I'm having to be a social worker because it was difficult dealing with the teams and creating a repeatable process, which is what engineers do. When the workers got to work and interacted at work in a different way than they would, say, in America, and it had to do with the resources that were available to those people to get in the place and be trained away and then repeat. And I was like, but that's why we're here, to also be.
I agree.
Every role, yes, there's a social worker hat under our big hat.
I agree with you. We don't value it.
All right.
So like all I'm saying is we don't value it, because at the end of the day, that you're not getting paid for being a social worker, and nor is a cop. And I know it because I worked in it. A police officer is not actually a social worker, because what they can do is they can put a handcuff on you. They can put a handcuff on you. I can't put a handcuff on nobody. So, again, when you have the ability to control people's bodies by law, I think it's a little different negotiating power you have by the essence of what you're able to do with your position. So that's the only group where I'm like, I don't think it's really fair they get to unionize because they got guns.
But you think ADAs should?
But I think everybody else should. I think I used to think teachers shouldn't be able to unionize because they're so critical to society. Like, them striking is tough. And I thought that as a teacher,
it's about equity. People need to be able to argue on their behalf.
But it's still a job, and at the end of the day, it's a job that confers a benefit that's non-negative. You're not arresting anyone. You're not taking anybody's liberty away. You're actually trying to provide a positive service. So yeah, those people should be allowed to unionize. And the only group I'm like, if you can kill me and it's lawful, I don't know if you should also be able to negotiate and strike. Just think like, geez, it's a lot of power at one place.
So yeah, so noted. I hear you. I think we need to definitely continue that piece of that conversation about who should be allowed to unionize and who shouldn't. But I think what I would say I'm most concerned about is the value distribution of the work, the toiling, the services that all of those different roles you just mentioned provide. What I don't think that we see, it's not, I don't think, but I think I can prove out multiple times over how we fail to distribute the value that is generated in the system from individuals doing whatever their gig is, whether they're teachers or cops or lawyers or you name it. I feel like we just went through all the types of jobs that 5-year-olds say they want to be when they grow up because that's all they know about. No one goes, I want to be a mediator. But my point is we have a value distribution problem. And as a result, people are more disengaged as society's population and the number of jobs that we need to manage the society's population scales. I think that is the problem, at least in my opinion, of our time, because, and I was just in an argument with somebody about the future of work and tech killing jobs. And like, tech never kills jobs. It creates more jobs. It just doesn't create higher wages. So we will do more work tomorrow than we ever have yesterday for less. And we cannot distribute value just on wages alone. I think there have to be productivity-based dividends that are kicked out to participants, sector by sector, industry by industry, locale by locale. And it is the only way forward to both give people dignity in the work that they do in the communities that they participate in, but also incentivize more participation. Because I think ultimately what we're identifying here is that we can't get people to play in the sandbox of life. They're too exhausted and too broke to do it. I'm not saying we'll get rid of billionairism, and I'm not saying everything will be equal, but making things equitable will incentivize a lot more of us to participate than whatever equality tried to be. I don't understand that word well at all. Well, again, we can get into that in a lot more detail.
So everybody should be able to unionize. And my concern,
everyone should have an argument. Everyone should be able to argue.
Everybody, and I don't disagree with everyone should. I'm just saying personally,
I'm saying they need a voice.
Sure, personally.
Yeah.
The ability to shoot me, handcuff me, and also be able to like negotiate when you're going to serve me is
that's tough. Don't be so yes, but what you're saying is an invalid argument to what I'm suggesting. So no, I think there's some real flaws in that, right? And so we should be able to design around what gets to be negotiated. If we're really talking about a fair negotiation and we're giving two entities adequate ability to present their opinions, their assumptions, their perception of whatever a status is, and how it might change or be more beneficial. But I think one thing that often happens in these negotiations is how we define success and how we define our incentives to pick outcomes are not about whoever the end customer or end user of the service is. It's like not designing healthcare to be preventative and making it to be, responsive. Same with how we talk about what policing might be. But we also have to remember we inherited these systems. Policing wasn't what it is today, in 1865. And I mean, again, it would take a whole show to go down into, what and how policing and militias, evolved out of pre-slavery times, at least, in this country. I'm happy to do that and do a deep dive into it. But what I'm saying about unionization is groups of people need to have the ability to negotiate against the broader institution that they are part of, because at some point, power, to reference Aristotle, corrupts because it just hits such a scale that the most responsible or the most dominant entities in a particular institution become submissive to that power. Mark Zuckerberg does not work for Mark Zuckerberg's mind anymore. He works for the $100 billion asset that Mark Zuckerberg represents, owning 17% of Meta. And if an entity accrues a lot of capital or a lot of people, like say the 8 million people who are here in Manhattan that may be negotiating against the 800,000 officers. I'm not sure if there's that many, but my point is the 100,000. Then
40,000.
Sure, whatever the number is, there's an imbalance of power and negotiation, and that's, I think, always the interesting line that we toe as communicators, in your case as lawyers, by trying to mediate between these entities and understand what the real value distribution is, because it is specific to who has power and how they play in certain situations. So
let me be explicit, because I don't want to leave here with you thinking we're on different pages.
I don't think we have different. I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
I'm saying that personally, I don't think they should exist. I understand that police unions exist. I guess my problem with it is there are other industries that are not allowed to unionize, and they're not allowed to unionize for the very reason I'm saying that the police shouldn't be unionized. The U.S. military cannot unionize. Okay, they're not allowed.
That's a different kind of force.
Again, my point and my criteria was
they have a whole different legal system. They have different judges.
I hear you. I'm saying the whole point.
A judge on who's the military judge and a regular judge.
I'm not arguing with you about any of that. I'm going to finish my point. My point is, who has the ability to arrest and kill people? And there's only two groups in this country who really have that ability. That's
civilians have rights.
The military and the police are the only two institutions that by law and by function are to do so. Right.
But it's about property rights, right? The police deal with it with citizens who have property rights, whereas military do not.
I am not disagreeing with you, but they're also still negotiating their contracts with the United States government. Again, that's what I'm saying, is that they're not allowed to unionize,
Bro.
as in fight against the government and say what their scale should be.
Right?
Maybe they should. Maybe they should be able to organize and say, hey, we're not going to do this if you don't pay us more. Because strikes certainly happened in American history with the military before. So certainly they could do it, but they don't allow it because it hurts the ability for readiness. It hurts the ability for a chain of command to work and to ensure that they're doing their purpose. The same thing happens in the police. If a sergeant can't tell his rank and file, the sergeant can't tell this guy, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. He just goes and gets a union rep. Tells the sergeant, you can't do that to me. So, it does have the same impact. The reasons that undergird why you are not allowed to have a union in the military is the same thing I'm saying. I get the structural differences and I get the legal. I'm a lawyer. I understand legally why it's allowed. I guess that's the hypocrisy that I just don't like about it. If people have the ability to put me in a camp, if people have the ability to take away my rights, I think that there should be a lot of chain of command over those people, a lot of rules around those people. And so to treat them like they're a carpenter is ridiculous. Like they're not a carpenter.
So I agree with that. I like the carpenter analogy a lot better than the military analogy, just because
carpenters can unionize, militaries cannot.
I know, and it's because they're radically different legal frameworks. But I don't need to tell the lawyer that, look, we're way over. We're gonna crop this and push it out. We'll do this more. We should do. I feel like this is just what we would do if either one of our phones rang. We would rant like this anyway. So this is just, at the very least, this is good therapy. So I'm happy to do it. Let's keep doing it. I am worried about your perspective on the next show, but let's have you in and figure that out. Not worried because we're on different. Like I don't think you're crazy. I don't. I think we agree about the vast majority of things. I love to have a show we try to figure out what don't we agree on. I don't know. That might not be good. I don't know. Anyway, I'm thinking out loud. This is unscripted, folks. Anyway, Reg, thank you for coming on. Now I wish I could hear what Peter would have to say on here. It's probably too many voices on here just to do an hour, but we got time, hopefully. And unless we're all in concentration camps soon.
I don't plan to be in one next week. So
me either. Not next week. I think it'll take them a while to get up here, but thoughts and prayers for everyone in the Carolinas and below.
Oh my goodness.
With that said, till next time. All right.
I always appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. And certainly if you want the perspective again, I'm probably not going to disagree with Chris too much, but
right.
It's a different perspective. I mean, he's not unionizing the police, but whatever.
Right. I'm with you. All right. Well, till next time.
All right. Thanks, brother.